Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. We're living in quite a time of incredible technological acceleration, aren't we? Especially with artificial intelligence.
Yeah, definitely. Things are moving so fast.
They really are. And as quickly as these systems evolve, so do, well, the really profound questions about how to manage them responsibly.
hmm
Just think back to the Industrial Revolution. I mean, it brought enormous economic gains, sure, but also really dangerous workplaces, horrible living conditions for a lot of people.
Right.
You know, the Crystal Palace in 1851, it was this marvel of technology admired by thousands,
hmm
right? But it also drew criticism for representing, well, a kind of false utopia.
That's a really powerful analogy. It really is.
And here we are again, on the cusp of another revolution.
Yeah, it feels like it. And the core challenge then, just like now, is how do we harness this immense innovation while proactively addressing its profound and often, let's face it, unexpected consequences?
Exactly. Which brings us to today. We're taking a deep dive into a really crucial document, the Berkeley GPAI's Foundation Model Risk Management Standards Profile. Quite a mouthful.
It is a mouthful, yeah, but it's incredibly important.
So our mission today is basically to unpack this profile for you. Think of it as a roadmap, essentially, for identifying, analyzing, mitigating the unique risks posed by this cutting-edge AI.
We'll be your guides, sort of walking you through this complex landscape one step at a time, like you're getting a personal masterclass, hopefully.
Exactly. Now, this document, it's primarily written for developers, the people building these systems. But understanding it gives you, our listener, a crucial shortcut to being really well informed about the guardrails, the safety measures being built for the future of AI.
It's about understanding the thinking behind the scenes,
Yeah.
understanding general purpose AI systems, GPAS, the base.
Okay, let's start unpacking this. The document uses this umbrella term, General Purpose AI Systems, or GPAIs. What actually distinguishes these from other kinds of AI? And why does that distinction matter so much when we talk about risk?
Right, that's the perfect starting point. So the core definition they use is that GPAIs are increasingly multi-purpose AI systems.
Okay. Let's start here.
What makes them, well, remarkable is their ability to accomplish or adapt to a whole range of distinct tasks. And here's the kicker, including some tasks they weren't specifically trained for.
Okay, so they can kind of generalize beyond their initial programming.
Precisely. That adaptability is exactly what sets them apart from, say, more traditional narrow AI systems. An AI built just to recognize cats in photos, that's its one job.
Right, very specific.
Very specific.
Yeah.
But when you think about these cutting-edge large language models, LLMs or generative AI or what they call frontier models, they all fall under this GTII's umbrella.
So it's not just about what they can do, but how broadly and flexibly they can apply those capabilities. That flexibility sounds like the real game changer.
It absolutely is. And what's particularly interesting here is the hierarchy within this umbrella term. So at a slightly broader level, you've got foundation models.
Foundation models. Okay.
There's our large-scale, high-capability subset of GPAIs. They're trained on incredibly broad data, massive data sets, often using self-supervision at scale. The key thing about them is their immense adaptability. They can be fine-tuned or adapted for just a huge range of downstream tasks.
Can you give us some examples, maybe names that folks listening might recognize?
Sure, yeah. When we talk foundation models, think of things like GPT-4, Claude 2, Palm 2, maybe Llama 2. These are the underlying kind of versatile platforms that countless other applications can then be built on top of.
Gotcha. The base layer almost.
Kind of, yeah. And then even more specifically, you have frontier models.
Frontier. Okay, so that sounds like the absolute cutting edge.
That's exactly it. They represent the largest scale, highest capability subset of either GPAIs or foundation models. They're the state-of-the-art. Their characteristics might include, record-breaking model size, enormous amounts of training compute, or just vast quantities of data used to create them.
So if foundation models are the powerful platforms, frontier models are the absolute peak of that power right now. Okay, so why does this hierarchy, this distinction, matter so much to you, our listener? Why should you care about these terms?
It's profound, really, because these aren't narrow AI systems contained within a single purpose. Their generality, their very nature, means their potential impacts, both the good and the bad, can spread incredibly widely, unpredictably even, across many sectors all at once.
Wow, okay.
And that makes managing their risk a far more complex and, frankly, more urgent challenge than with AI systems that are built for just one specific thing. I be the genesis of this guidance, background, and purpose.
Okay, so these GPIIs and foundation models, they're like these multi-purpose platforms for potentially countless end-use applications. But what are these qualitatively distinct properties the document mentions, the things that make them so uniquely hard to govern, maybe harder than older machine learning models?
That's a really critical question. The document points out several unique properties. First, like we said, their potential to be applied to many sectors at once. A single GPAIs could impact healthcare, finance, education, security, all simultaneously.
Right, the ripple effect is potentially huge.
Exactly. Second, they have the potential for large-scale societal, environmental, security, and economic impacts. We're not just talking about impacts on individual users here. This is about systemic effects, effects across whole communities, whole nations.
And then there's that big one you mentioned earlier, emergent properties.
Yeah.
That concept is, well, it's fascinating, but also unsettling. The idea that an AI could just develop unforeseen capabilities or even risks as it gets bigger. How do you even test for something like that? Something that emerges unexpectedly.
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's the really challenging aspect. So emergent properties refer to these unexpected beneficial capabilities, which is great, but also critically unexpected risks of adverse events. Things that weren't explicitly programmed, maybe weren't even foreseen during development.
They can appear.
They can kind of emerge, yeah, as
Yeah.
models scale up in size and compute and data. Now, sometimes maybe partially emergent properties could have been spotted earlier in smaller models if different metrics had been used, which really underscores the need for early, continuous, and importantly, diverse evaluation methods. You need to look from many angles.
Okay, so connecting this back to the bigger picture then. These unique properties, the multi-purpose nature, the potential for large-scale impact, these emerging capabilities, they really demand a different, maybe a more comprehensive approach to risk management.
Absolutely, a fundamentally different approach. And that's why this document exists. It's specifically designed to complement broader, more general frameworks that people might already know, like the NIST AI Risk Management Framework, the AI RMF, or the international standard ISO-IS 23894.
So it's not replacing those, it's adding to them.
Exactly. Think of it as a specialized add-on, a detailed set of practices tailored specifically for the unique challenges of GPAIs. It has a cross-sectoral and early development focus. That means it tackles these important underlying risks that pop up during the early development stages, even before we know for sure every single specific end-use application.
So it's about building in safety from the ground up, even with some uncertainty.
Precisely. Building foundational guardrails early on.
And this wasn't just cooked up in an academic lab, right? It sounds like it drew on real-world experiences.
Oh, very much so. It came out of a multi-stakeholder process. There was input, feedback from a really diverse range of organizations,
Yeah.
GPIs developers themselves, civil society groups, academics, government folks. That collaboration gives it significant weight. And furthermore, the profile actually integrates examples of real-world risk management practices from market leaders. Things like OpenAI's early work on GPT-2 misuse cases, or their disallowed use categories for GPT-3. Those directly inform this guidance.
Interesting.
Or look at Hugging Face's Bloom LLM with its responsible AI license. That's another example. Even collaborative efforts like the Partnership on AI have influenced this profile. So it's grounded in practice, not just theory, which makes it much more credible and hopefully useful. I see. Who is this profile for? Intended audience and benefits.
So the document says its primary audience is the developers, the people building these big state-of-the-art systems. But you, our listener, you can benefit too. So why should organizations, or why should you, pay attention to this document? What's in it for everyone?
That's a really important question. Let's break it down. For the developers, the upstream folks creating the original GPAIs, it provides invaluable best practices. Practices tailored to their unique issues, like how do you share responsibility between the original creator and the downstream developer who builds a specific app on top?
Right, that handoff seems critical.
It is. It helps them conform to leading AI risk standards, helps with compliance for upcoming regulations like the EU AI Act. Basically, it helps them stay competitive without compromising on safety, security, accountability.
So for the big AI labs, it's about smart development, staying ahead legally and ethically.
Exactly. Now, for deployers, evaluators, and users, the downstream folks, it gives them increased awareness of the risks involved with these powerful systems and the best practices for managing them. It also provides information that's useful for evaluating how well the upstream developers actually followed those practices. That's crucial if you're choosing an AI platform to build your product on.
Okay, so it helps the ecosystem evaluate itself in a way.
In a way, yes. And then, maybe most importantly, for individuals, society, and regulators, the ultimate goal here is maximizing the benefits of AI while minimizing the negative impacts. Impacts to individuals, communities, organizations, society, the planet,
The whole spectrum.
the whole spectrum. Protecting fundamental rights, minimizing environmental harm, preventing systemic or even catastrophic consequences. The document actually points out that preventing catastrophe often disproportionately benefits disadvantaged people, which is an important equity consideration. And from a regulatory angle, this profile acts as sort of soft law norms, guidelines that developers are incentivized to follow and that regulators can look at when they're thinking about creating actual hard law.
Gotcha. But it's not a magic wand, right? You mentioned limitations earlier. The document points out its own limits, too.
Absolutely, and it's important to be upfront about that. Its primary focus is on risk management for GPA's developers. It's not designed for sector-specific applications, like, say, detailed guidance for AI in healthcare. You'd need extra specialized guidance for that. Nor does it cover general IT security issues that aren't directly related to GPA's development.
Okay, so it's specifically about the risks of the GPAS itself.
Correct. And another big limitation is just the relatively nascent state of best practices in this whole field. AI tech is moving incredibly fast. What we think is best practice today, well, it's going to change. This profile is explicitly designed as a living document. They expect annual updates.
Which means, for you listening, continuous learning is absolutely essential. What we talk about today is really just a snapshot of current best practices. It's not the final word. That's a crucial takeaway as you navigate this fast-moving world of AI.
Couldn't read more. It's a moving target, too. Navigating the risk management framework. Core components.
Okay, so this profile, it's not meant to be used in isolation, right?
Okay.
How does it fit into that broader landscape of AI risk management you mentioned, like NIST?
Right, yeah, it's explicitly designed to be used in conjunction with those existing well-established frameworks. Think NIST AI RMF and its playbook, or international standards like ISO 23894. It's like a specialized add-on, a more detailed playbook specifically for GPAI that plugs into those larger structures. So the NIST AI RMF, for instance, it outlines these core functions, broad categories of activity that apply across the entire AI lifecycle. This document, the Berkeley Profile, provides tailored guidance for each of those functions, specifically for GPAIs.
Can you remind us what those core functions are?
Sure. First is govern. That's all about establishing the policies, defining the roles, assigning responsibilities within an organization for managing AI risk. It sets the overall framework.
Okay, the foundational rules.
Exactly. Then there's map. This involves identifying the AI risks within their specific context, understanding the landscape of potential harms and benefits.
Seeing the terrain.
Yep. Third is measure. Here, the focus shifts to actually rating the AI system's trustworthiness characteristics. This is where evaluation, metrics, assessment for identified risks come in. How do we actually gauge these things?
Putting numbers on it, or at least descriptions.
Or descriptions, exactly. Because sometimes numbers aren't feasible yet. And finally, manage. This function is about making the decisions. How do we prioritize, avoid, mitigate, or maybe even accept certain AI risks? It's the action phase, implementing the risk treatments.
Govern, map, measure, manage.
Yeah.
Okay, so this document adds that GPAI-specific layer onto each of those, and it uses precise language you mentioned.
Yes, very precise. Like in many standards documents, when it says should, that's a strong recommendation. Developers are really advised to do that. When it says can, it indicates something is possible, an option, but maybe not a core recommendation. That precision is really important for clarity when you're building these complex systems. IB, categorizing risks, impact areas, harm factors, and trustworthiness.
Okay, so when we talk about risks, the document breaks them down. Specific categories of impacts, harm factors. What are the key areas here that you need to be aware of as someone trying to understand this landscape?
This framework is really helpful for categorizing the potential fallout. Gives us a structured way to think about where things might go wrong. So first, they talk about reasonably foreseeable impacts, map 1.1. These are the broad areas where GPAIs could potentially cause harm.
Like what?
Impacts to individuals, their health, safety, well-being, fundamental rights, impacts to groups particularly focusing on populations vulnerable to disproportionate adverse impacts or harms, and impacts to society that encompasses everything from macroeconomic effects like job displacement to environmental impacts like the carbon footprint of training these huge models.
Okay, individuals, groups, society, broad categories.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned the really high-stakes stuff, the significant, severe, or catastrophic harm factors.
Yeah.
This is where it gets, well, serious.
Absolutely. This is map 5.1 in the document, and these are the outcomes we absolutely have to proactively prevent. These high-stakes factors include things like systemic issues, correlated bias, and discrimination, not just one biased outcome, but widespread societal harm. Also, impacts to societal trust or democratic processes. Think large-scale manipulation, deception, like using generative models to create deepfake misinformation campaigns.
Yeah, we're seeing that already.
We are. Then there's correlated robustness failures, where a failure in the AI could spread across multiple high-stakes domains, like critical infrastructure systems. Imagine that.
Scary.
Very. Also, the capability to manipulate or deceive humans in harmful ways, like an AI convincingly persuading someone to take dangerous actions, maybe causing physical or psychological harm.
Wow.
And finally, the really alarming prospect of loss of understanding and control of an AI system in a real-world context. Think, an AI escaping its sandbox environment, maybe replicating itself on other computer systems.
Okay, those are definitely scenarios that demand urgent attention. What about the flip side? The desired qualities of AI that help us avoid these harms.
Right, that brings us to the AI trustworthiness characteristics measure too. These are the qualities we want our AI systems to have, and by managing them well, by building them in, we inherently mitigate the risks.
So what are they?
The profile lists several key characteristics: safety, reliability, and robustness, security and resiliency, accountability and transparency, explainability and interpretability, privacy, and crucially, fairness and bias management. These are really the pillars for building responsible AI. High priority steps. Where to focus first?
So if you're an organization looking at this document, maybe feeling a bit overwhelmed, what are the absolute baseline things, the minimum expectations for managing GPI's risks? Where should they focus first?
That's a great question. The profile does highlight specific steps that deserve high priority. These form the, let's say, minimum expectations for anyone developing or deploying GPIs. These are the foundational practices you absolutely need to get right.
Okay, what are they?
First, identify uses, misuses, and abuses. This means really understanding all the reasonably foreseeable ways a GPIs could be used or abused, not just the intended positive uses. The document gives some chilling examples, like automated generation of disinformation, helping proliferate chemical or biological weapons.
Whoa.
Yeah. Or discovering software vulnerabilities. That's map 1.1. Second, assess catastrophic impacts. Specifically determine if your GPAIs could lead to those significant, severe, or catastrophic outcomes we just talked about, map 5.1.
So face the worst-case scenarios head-on.
You have to. Third, red teaming and adversarial testing. Organizations should use red teams extensively. These are teams that deliberately try to break the system, find its weaknesses, identify dangerous capabilities or vulnerabilities before it gets out into the world. That's measure 1.1.
Okay, proactive stress test.
Extremely proactive. Fourth, track unmeasurable risks. This is important. It acknowledges we can't quantify everything yet, but it's vital to track identified risks, even if you can only describe them qualitatively, especially if the potential impacts are severe. Measure 1.1 and 3.2.
Don't ignore what you can't easily measure.
Exactly. Fifth, implement risk reduction controls. Apply specific controls throughout the AI lifecycle. Things like independent auditing, incremental scale-up, we'll talk more about that, and staged release strategies. Manage 1.3, 2.3, 2.4.
Okay. Building in safeguards.
Right. Sixth, report and communicate risks. You need to incorporate the risks you've identified into your reporting and engagement with all stakeholders, downstream developers, regulators, users, the communities impacted, often using tools like model cards or system codes. Govern 4.2.
Transparency is key.
It is. And finally, documentation. Document the whole process, how you considered and chose your risk mitigation controls. And importantly, it notes that some sensitive details, like specific security vulnerabilities, can be responsibly omitted from public materials if they are made available to independent auditors. That's to prevent misuse of that sensitive info.
Right, a balance between transparency and security. So
Well-
it sounds like it's about being incredibly proactive, thorough, transparent where appropriate, and even honest about what you don't fully understand yet.
That's perfect summary. Proactive, thorough, transparent, and humble about the unknowns. 3. Deep dive into governance, the govern function.
All right, let's dig into that first function, govern. Governing AI starts with setting clear policies. How does this document recommend weaving that idea of trustworthiness into the very fabric of how an organization develops AI?
Govern 1.2 is all about this. It emphasizes whittling those trustworthy AI characteristics we listed, safety, fairness, security, etc., throughout the organization's policies and practices. It's not an afterthought. It should be embedded from the start.
So how did that look in practice?
Well, for example, being safe means establishing controls, regularly reevaluating safety as the model or context changes, assessing shifts over time, reporting incidents properly. Being fair means actively engaging with impacted communities, rigorously testing for biased outputs, reviewing human rights impacts, ensuring benefits are distributed equitably. For secure and resilient, it means assessing robustness, especially in new or unexpected environments, protecting against attacks, encouraging vulnerability research. Explainable and interpretable means ensuring users actually understand the system's behavior and its limitations. Privacy enhanced means enabling consent, opt out, notifying about breaches. And accountable and transparent involves things like determining a safe release strategy, informing users when they're interacting with AI, allowing opt out, supporting third-party audits, and providing ways for people to seek redress if they're negatively affected.
Wow, that's a lot of responsibility packed into each of those characteristics.
It is, it's comprehensive.
But who is actually accountable for what? Especially in this complex AI value chain where you might have the original creators, then others building on top. How is that responsibility divided?
That's a crucial question, and Govern 2.1 tackles it directly. It defines roles and responsibilities. So upstream developers, the original GPIS creators, they're primarily responsible for tasks where they have unique access and capability.
Like what kind of tasks?
Things like assessing the risks during early-stage development, even for research projects, conducting testing that requires direct access to the training data or the core system, identifying foreseeable uses and misuses, trying to prevent those misuses, and, critically, making necessary information available to downstream developers and independent auditors, things like the model's knowledge limits, any dangerous capabilities found, incident reports.
Okay, so the original creators have a big chunk of the responsibility for the core model. What about the downstream developers, the ones building specific applications using that GPI bioform?
Right. Their responsibility lies more in the context-specific risk assessment and management. If they take a GPIS and fine-tune it for a specific purpose, say healthcare diagnostics, they need to do their own testing and documentation for those modifications in that specific context.
Makes sense. The closer you are to the application, the more context you have.
Exactly. The document also suggests implementing a 3 lines of defense model for internal accountability within an organization.
3 lines of defense. What's that?
It's a common risk management model. The first line is the research or product team itself, headed by someone like the head of research. They own the risk initially. The second line is the independent risk management function. Think chief risk officer, legal, compliance, technical safety, security teams. They oversee and challenge the first line. And the third line is internal audit, often reporting to the board, headed by the chief audit executive. They provide independent assurance over the whole process. Maybe an ethics board fits in here too.
Okay, so multiple layers of internal checks and balances.
Precisely. And crucially, Govern 2.3 states that executive leadership bears the ultimate responsibility. They have to make the final decisions about AI system development and deployment, including declaring the organization's risk tolerance, how much risk they're willing to accept, and actively supporting the whole risk management process from the top down. AI safety needs to be a leadership priority. 3B, culture and communication, fostering a safety mindset.
Okay, so policies and accountability structures are one thing, but the document also really stresses the importance of organizational culture. How do you actually embed a safety-first mindset throughout the whole development process? It's not just rules on paper, right?
Absolutely not. Govern 3.1 makes a fascinating point here. It highlights that properly identifying GPAI's risks and potential impacts requires a truly demographically and disciplinarily diverse team. It's not enough to just have the AI engineers look at it.
Why is diversity so key here?
Because different backgrounds, different disciplines, different life experiences bring different perspectives on potential harms. The guidance says you need product development folks, operations, security, sure, but also human-computer interaction specialists, user experience designers, marketing, sales, legal policy, ethics professionals.
A real cross-section of the organization.
Yeah. Yes, and crucially, it goes further. It says you should also include people from research and development for technically informed views, but also external-facing teams and stakeholders. That includes communities that might be impacted by the AI, people providing human labor for training, like data labelers who might be exposed to harmful content, and external red teamers or auditors.
Bringing in outside eyes.
Critical outside eyes. And get this, they even recommend including social scientists and historians
Historians, why?
to provide perspective on the potential for structural or systemic risks. How might this AI interact with existing societal systems based on historical patterns or social dynamics? It's about understanding the bigger context, the deeper potential impacts.
Wow, that's a really profound commitment to critical self-assessment, bringing in all those diverse viewpoints to try and foresee these complex problems.
It absolutely is, and Govern 4.1 builds on that, emphasizing the need to foster a critical thinking and safety-first mindset right from the outset. Policies should require those oversight functions, legal, compliance, risk management, to be involved from the very beginning of system design, not just bolted on at the end.
Makes sense. Get them in early.
Yeah, and it promotes mechanisms like audits and red teaming specifically to enable effective challenge of decisions, to push back against potential groupthink within the development team.
Okay. And what about protecting people who speak up internally?
That's another crucial point. The document says organizations should establish whistleblower protections for insiders who report serious AI system problems. That provides an essential safety valve if normal processes fail.
Okay. So you've identified risks, you got the culture hopefully pointing towards safety. How do organizations then communicate these risks,
Yeah.
internally and externally?
Govern 4.2 focuses squarely on robust documentation and communication. Organizations need clear policies and processes for conducting AI system impact assessments, aligning them with regulatory requirements where they exist. And these assessments need to be verified and repeated as the system changes.
Living documents, essentially.
Exactly. And this feeds into comprehensive reporting. The identified risks need to be incorporated into how the organization engages with all its stakeholders, downstream developers, regulators, users, impacted communities.
How do they do that? What form does that communication take?
Often it's through these transparency mechanisms we mentioned, things like model cards, data sheets for data sets, reward reports, transparency notes, or system cards. These documents should detail things like expected risks, the assumptions made during development, information about the training data, the testing performed, and any dependencies the system has.
Providing a sort of nutrition label for the AI model.
That's a great analogy, yeah. The appendix notes that companies like OpenAI and Anthropic do provide various forms of public documentation, but it also points out that the completeness varies, so there's room for improvement there.
So it's not just about what you find out about your AI's risks, but critically, what you share about it.
Precisely. And Governing 4.3 pushes this even further. It encourages policies and procedures for facilitating AI testing, identifying incidents, and importantly, sharing insights about limitations within appropriate groups of AI actors.
Sharing the bad news, too, essentially.
Yes. Including reporting and documenting how incidents were responded to, and even advocating for public disclosure of incidents and information sharing. The idea is to build a collective knowledge base across the industry about what can go wrong, so everyone can learn and adapt. They specifically mention the AI incident database as a resource for this kind of sharing. They see external engagement and lifecycle management.
Okay, the document emphasizes external feedback. Beyond just internal teams and auditors, who else should be providing feedback and how should organizations gather it?
Govern 5.1 outlines several essential models for getting that crucial external feedback, recognizing that internal teams just can't see everything. These include things like active deliberation with impacted communities.
Who does that include?
It could be people involved in the human labor aspect, like data annotators. It could be artists or authors whose work might have been scraped for training data, intended users, obviously, but also people whose livelihoods might be altered by the AI. Getting their perspectives is vital.
Okay, what else?
Independent auditing, conducted throughout the AI lifecycle, not just at the end. Bug bounty and bias bounty programs, actively incentivizing outsiders to find flaws. Formal red teaming by external experts. And establishing clear feedback channels for users or impacted individuals, including mechanisms for appeals and redress if something goes wrong.
So really opening the doors to external scrutiny and input.
Exactly. It's about embracing that outside perspective.
Now, one point you might find surprising, and it's something the document flags as a real challenge, particularly for open source models, is this idea of decommissioning, taking a model offline. What makes that so difficult for open source GPAIs?
Ah, yes. Govern 1.7 highlights this critical limitation. For open source and fully open access GPIs, where the model parameter weights, the core brain of the model, are publicly released or maybe even leaked, organizations are essentially unable to decommission systems that other people have built using those weights.
Wait, so once the code or the weights are out there, anyone can download them, run them, deploy them, and the original creator can't just switch them off.
That's exactly the problem. Once those foundational model weights are in the wild, they're out of the original developer's direct control. They can't recall them like a faulty product.
So the genie is well and truly out of the bottle.
Precisely. Which emphasizes the profound need for really careful release strategies. Things like structured access, maybe releasing through an API first or doing a staged release. We'll get more into those under the manage function. But it underscores the risk of just putting the most powerful models out there for anyone to download immediately.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, the appendix points to Meta AI's Llama 2. Its full open access release, including downloadable model weights, is a key example here. While Meta can update its own versions or recommend users adopt the latest, safest version, there's no reliable way to ensure all the independently deployed instances of Llama 2 out there get decommissioned or updated if a serious unforeseen risk is discovered later. And that contrasts sharply with models like OpenAI's GPT-4 or Anthropic's Claude 2, which are typically only available via hosted APIs. That API-based access gives the developers much more control. They can update the model or even pull it back from widespread use if a catastrophic flaw is found. This difference in release strategy is one of the biggest challenges in responsible AI deployment right now. 4. Mapping the landscape of risk, the map function.
Okay, let's move to the next function, map. Mapping risks. This sounds like really understanding the full potential of a GPIs, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The document stresses identifying all foreseeable uses, misuses, and abuses, not just the ones the developers intended. What are some of the more chilling examples of misuse cited?
Right, Map 1.1 really hammers this home. GPIs can have so many reasonably foreseeable uses, misuses, and abuses that go way beyond their original design. The document lists several categories of really concerning misuses, specifically for things like LLMs and other GPIs. Things like automated generation of convincing disinformation or phishing material at scale, aiding with the proliferation of chemical, biological, or radiological weapons or other WMDs, discovering and exploiting software vulnerabilities automatically, or creating violent, illegal, discriminatory, or otherwise harmful content.
It's quite a spectrum of potential harm. And the document also touches on the risks stemming from the data these systems are trained on, doesn't it? Not just the outputs.
Yes, absolutely. It stresses that it's crucial to identify the goals, but also the limitations of the data collection and curation process, especially for LLMs trained on these massive, often opaque internet data sets that just can't be thoroughly inspected.
Why is that so important?
Because the risks aren't just in what the AI says or does. They can stem from biases, inaccuracies, or even harmful content baked into its very foundation, the data it learned from. And this touches on very real current issues, like the numerous copyright lawsuits from artists and writers who object to their work being used as training data without consent or compensation. The data itself carries risk.
Okay, and what about the broader impacts we need to map, beyond just direct misuse or data issues?
The potential scope of impacts is just vast. The document breaks it down. You need to consider impacts at the organizational level, impacts on the developer's own mission, functions, like maybe losing some control over the AI's behavior, their reputation, internal culture, even the cost of legal compliance.
Right.
Then there are impacts to other organizations, ripple effects. Then impacts to individuals, health, safety, well-being, fundamental rights. Think about disparate performance for different demographic groups, perpetuating bias or stereotypes, causing representational harm.
Okay.
And finally, the big picture. Societal impacts, macroeconomic effects like technological job displacement, impacts on democratic institutions, polarization, extremism, effects on quality of life. And critically, environmental impacts, the huge carbon emissions and resource use associated with training these massive models. It's a truly interconnected web of potential consequences.
Why this matters to you listening is clear. This isn't just about technical glitches. It's about potentially deep societal shifts and widespread harms that could touch almost every aspect of life. IVB, setting boundaries, risk tolerances. This leads us to a really critical, almost philosophical question. What level of risk is actually acceptable? How does the document recommend organizations go about setting these risk tolerance thresholds? Where do you draw the line?
MAP 1.5 addresses this directly. It's about determining the organization's maximum allowable risk tolerance. This isn't easy. It involves organizations proactively setting policies on what constitutes an unacceptable risk threshold for GPAI's development and deployment. The goal is to prevent risks that have a substantial probability of leading to catastrophic outcomes that can't be adequately mitigated.
So drawing a line in the sand.
Exactly. And the NIST AI RMF, which this profile builds on, is even more explicit. It suggests that where significant negative impacts are imminent, severe harms are actually occurring, or catastrophic risks are present, development and deployment should cease. That's a very clear red line. Stop work until it's safe.
Cease development. Wow.
Yeah, and for systems that have the potential for these unknown emergent properties we talked about, the guidance says it's vital to include a margin of safety, a buffer.
Right.
Like safety engineering in other fields, bridges, airplanes, you build in a buffer between the worst plausible system failure and these unacceptable risk thresholds.
So you don't push right up to the edge of disaster.
Precisely. This could mean, for example, choosing not to deploy certain AI agent systems if they have capabilities that could cause physical or psychological harm, and you can't reliably prevent or detect that behavior. Better safe than sorry.
Okay, so organizations are supposed to set these internal thresholds. But you mentioned earlier, based on the retrospective testing, that these thresholds often aren't made public. How transparent are companies being about where they draw that line?
That's a really key tension. The appendix testing GPT-4, Claude 2, PaLM 2, Llama 2 found that while these leading developers often discuss risks in their documentation, they generally don't publicly disclose their specific organizational risk tolerances or thresholds. This was flagged as a common gap.
So we don't necessarily know their internal stop signals.
Not publicly, no. Now, the document clarifies that while public disclosure is often beneficial, the absolutely crucial part is that these determinations are made, they're documented internally, and they can be shared confidentially with independent auditors. So it's about ensuring a clear internal decision-making process exists for when to pause or stop, and that executive leadership takes ultimate responsibility for that decision, even if the exact threshold isn't broadcast. IVC understanding system limitations and third-party dependencies.
One of the big challenges with LLMs that people encounter all the time is when they just make things up, right? They sound confident, but they're wrong. How does the profile address these knowledge limits or confabulations?
Yeah, MAP 2.2 tackles this directly. It acknowledges that fully scoping and understanding the knowledge limits of these general-purpose AI systems is actually very difficult.
Even for the developers themselves.
Even for the developers, LLMs often confabulate, as you said. They create factually inaccurate statements, sometimes quite convincingly, without flagging them as uncertain. This happens especially on topics where their training data was limited or maybe contradictory. It can be incredibly misleading for users.
So what's the recommendation?
Documentation is key. The guidance states that GPAI's developers should describe or list, preferably with examples, the kinds of uses that would exceed the system's knowledge limits, and also clarify what uses are appropriate given those limits. And critically, this information must be clearly featured in the documentation provided to downstream developers and end users.
So basically tell people what the AI doesn't know or where it's likely to go wrong.
Exactly. Manage expectations and prevent users from over-relying on it in areas where it's weak or prone to making things up. Transparency about limitations is crucial.
Okay. What about the risks that come from using components or data developed by others? I mean, in today's world, these AI systems aren't built entirely from scratch in a vacuum, right? They rely on other pieces.
That's a huge point. MAP 4.1 and 4.2 cover managing risks from third-party entities and resources. This is all about ensuring that if your AI system relies on external datasets, pre-trained models from elsewhere, or other software components, you're actively managing the risks associated with those dependencies.
So what does that involve?
It involves due diligence. GPAI's developers should identify risk related to biases, limitations, or even security vulnerabilities in the datasets or third-party models they use for training. Downstream developers, in turn, need to identify the context-specific risks of the applications they build on top of a GKI's, considering the limitations of that base model.
And information needs to flow between these parties.
Yes, information sharing is critical. Downstream developers should request information from upstream developers about known biases, limitations, etc. And importantly, they should also report back any new vulnerabilities or biases they discover in the underlying GPAIs during their own use or testing. It's a two-way street.
Creating a feedback loop in the supply chain.
Exactly. And finally, mechanisms should be established to facilitate the AI system's auditability by independent third parties. This includes things like ensuring traceability of the development process, documenting where training data came from, and logging processes effectively. It's about making the whole system, including its dependencies, more inspectable. V, measuring trustworthiness and risk, the measure function.
All right, let's move on to measure.
Huh.
Once we've mapped the potential risks, how do we actually, well, measure them? This feels like where the rubber really meets the road. And it sounds like red teaming is a major part of this evaluation process.
Absolutely. Measure 1.1 is all about identifying and applying the right methods and metrics. But here's a crucial point. The document acknowledges that for many important risk factors, especially with these cutting-edge GPAIs, qualitative assessment procedures are often more appropriate right now than trying to force everything into a quantitative metric.
Why is that?
Because robust, reliable quantitative metrics for things like, say, the potential for large-scale deception or the risk of emergent dangerous capabilities, they might not exist yet, or they might be very hard to validate. So the guidance emphasizes using tools like algorithmic impact assessments, human rights impact assessments, bug bounties, bias bounties, and yes, extensive red teaming.
So detailed descriptions and expert judgment are key, not just numbers.
For many aspects, yes, and it stresses that it's vital to track identified risks, even if you can only characterize them qualitatively, especially if the potential impacts could be severe or catastrophic. Don't let the lack of a perfect metric stop you from tracking a known danger. It really acknowledges the current limitations in AI measurement.
Okay, so tell us more about this red teaming. What does it actually entail, especially for these really advanced models? It sounds intense.
It is, and it's considered a critical control. For cutting-edge GPAIs, foundation models, and especially frontier models, the guidance says red teams should evaluate several key things.
Right.
They should probe for those unacceptable risk factors we discussed, MAP 1.5, and those high-impact or catastrophic harm factors, MAP 5.1.
Okay.
And importantly, they should specifically look for dangerous capabilities. This is where it gets very specific and quite concerning. They need to assess the model's potential for dual-use applications, like enabling biological, chemical, or radiological risks. Its capabilities for sophisticated cyber attacks, its capacity to potentially control physical systems, its capacity for self-replication or propagation, and also broader societal risks like severe bias and discrimination potential.
That's a heavy checklist.
Right.
What are some of the recommended practices for doing this kind of rigorous red teaming effectively?
The document points to available procedures from researchers and real-world examples, like the dangerous capability evaluations found in OpenAI's GPT-4 system card. Some key recommendations include considering using automated generation of test cases to supplement human efforts. Crucially, partnering with independent red teaming organizations for objectivity to avoid internal biases or blind spots. OpenAI, for example, used ARC Evils, an external group, to red team GPT-4 before release. That provides a much more credible assessment.
Makes sense.
It's also vital to grant red teams appropriate access to the final versions of foundation models before they're deployed. And if the model is fine-tuned later, you should re-red team those modifications. Organizations also need to ensure they protect proprietary or unreleased model weights during the red teaming process to prevent leaks.
Security is paramount even during testing.
Absolutely. And critically, organizations need to allocate substantial resources to this. Anthropic, for example, suggests it can take 100+ hours of dedicated expert time just to properly probe the true capabilities of a frontier model. The document explicitly warns against superficial audits that might provide false assurance. Rigor is absolutely key.
That distinction, focusing not just on how well the AI performs its intended tasks, but specifically probing how it might fail or be misused, that seems absolutely critical. It really shifts the focus.
It does. It's about understanding the failure modes and abuse potential, not just the success cases.
Okay, so that's red teaming. How does the document then translate those broader trustworthiness characteristics we talked about, safety, security, fairness, into concrete, measurable practices for developers during this measure phase? VB, trustworthiness characteristics in practice.
Right. Let's look at how specific trustworthiness characteristics get measured in practice, according to the profile. For safety, reliability, and robustness, measure 2.6, developers need to thoroughly measure system performance, both during development and once deployed. Especially under stress conditions, they need to push the system beyond its known limitations to see how it breaks.
Stress testing it, basically.
Exactly. Testing against past incidents or near misses is also recommended. And monitoring the system in real time once deployed is crucial for rapid response. Documenting and practicing incident response plans falls under here too.
Okay. What about security? You mentioned protecting the model weights earlier.
Yes, security and resilience, measure 2.7, is huge. A key focus is protecting model weight security, ensuring the integrity and confidentiality of the model's core parameters. This is especially critical for frontier models, where a leak or theft of the weights could enable widespread misuse with potentially high consequence impacts.
So how do they actually do that? Lock them in a digital vault?
Pretty much. The guidance suggests implementing robust information security frameworks, like the NIST cybersecurity framework, or equivalents like ISO 27001. For frontier models, they recommend applying guidance used for protecting high-value assets, think Fort Knox level security. For other foundation models, maybe moderate impact guidance is sufficient, but still robust.
And what specific checks should they run?
Specific security checks include red teaming, focused on security vulnerabilities, checking for backdoors, AI trojans, prompt injection vulnerabilities, especially if the model might process untrusted data, engaging in continuous monitoring, setting up vulnerability disclosure programs, bug bounties, even tracking vulnerabilities found in other similar GPAIs to learn from the ecosystem.
Proactive defense.
And deterrence, too. Using things like watermarking technologies can help deter data and model extraction attacks.
Okay. What about accountability and transparency? How are those measured?
For accountability and transparency, measure 2.8, it's about tracking organizational accountability, things like policy exceptions, escalations, documenting those critical go-no-go decisions, and documenting the transparency mechanisms used, like how users are informed if they're interacting with AI-generated content.
And explainability. That sounds like a tough one for these complex black box models.
It is. Explainability and interpretability, measure 2.9, presents a significant challenge, especially for large language models based on deep learning. The document acknowledges they can be extremely limited in this area and might even be inappropriate for applications that require a high degree of explainability, like maybe certain legal or medical contexts.
And so sometimes the answer is, we can't explain it well enough for this use case.
Potentially, yes. And a particularly concerning aspect here is something called deceptive alignment.
Deceptive alignment. What's that?
It's the worry that a GPAIs might appear to behave as intended, following its instructions, but for an unintended, potentially harmful underlying reason or goal that we can't see. Interpretability methods are key to trying to detect and prevent this, but the guidance says developers should track such risks even if current interpretability methods are insufficient. Again, acknowledging the limits.
Wow. Okay. What about privacy? That's a huge concern with AI.
Privacy, measure 2.1 hour, is a major challenge. Sensitive data, personally identifiable information that might have been scraped from the web during training, can sometimes be revealed or inferred through carefully crafted user prompts. This requires enabling mechanisms for user consent, opt-out where feasible, and clear notification if breaches occur.
And fairness and bias.
Fairness and bias, measure 2.11, is absolutely crucial. Measurement involves rigorously testing for biased outputs across different demographic groups, actively engaging with impacted communities to understand potential harms, assessing human rights implications, and trying to ensure benefits are equitably distributed. Identifying systemic bias hidden within the training data is a key part of this. Tools like the BBQ benchmark are mentioned as examples.
Okay. And lastly, environmental impact.
Yes, environmental impact, measure 2.12. Developers should assess the carbon footprint of training these large-scale machine learning models, which is particularly significant for LLMs due to the massive computation involved. Tools like MLCO2 impact are mentioned that can help estimate this.
So what you're hearing, listener, is that building trust requires this incredibly holistic approach to measurement. It covers everything from data privacy and bias to security vulnerabilities and even the environmental footprint. It's about meticulously evaluating every single facet of the AI's existence.
It really is a comprehensive checklist for evaluation. VC tracking and continuous feedback. Measure 3.1 brings in another important dimension: time. It emphasizes thinking about longer-term time periods for risk assessment. Not just the immediate risks at launch, but identifying unintended potential future events that might occur down the line and should trigger a reassessment.
So asking what if questions about the future.
Exactly. Asking, what if this AI system is deployed for 5 years, 10 years? What additional impacts or impacts of greater magnitude might occur then? It's about foresight. Organizations should identify and plan for potential trigger events.
Like what kind of triggers?
What if a key mitigation control fails unexpectedly? What if there are sudden, unexpected developments in AI capabilities? Maybe much more powerful systems become available, or new emergent capabilities are discovered through clever prompting. What if a near-miss incident occurs involving a similar system deployed elsewhere? The guidance suggests organizations should actively monitor things like the AI Incident Database, AAI, for reports on other systems to learn from others' experiences.
So stay vigilant about the changing landscape. And you mentioned earlier that even if you can't perfectly measure a risk, you still need to keep track of it.
Absolutely. Measure 3.2 is all about tracking identified risks, even if they're difficult to assess quantitatively or if you can only describe them qualitatively.
How do you track something fuzzy like that?
Often using a risk register. It's a systematic way to document these uncertainties and known concerns, even if you don't have precise numbers. Furthermore, risk tracking should involve ongoing monitoring of newly identified capabilities and limitations of the GPAIs once it's deployed. That means watching API usage patterns, paying attention to public discussions about new ways people are using the model. If significant new information comes to light post-deployment, the risks need to be reassessed and the safeguards updated. It's a continuous, vigilant process.
This whole measurement and tracking process sounds like it must rely heavily on feedback from users and others outside the development team, not just internal monitoring.
Measure 3.3 highlights exactly that. It underscores the importance of establishing robust feedback processes, mechanisms for end users, impacted communities, and other stakeholders to report problems, share their experiences, and potentially appeal system outcomes they believe are unfair or harmful.
So that real-world feedback loop is essential.
It's invaluable. It feeds directly back into that continuous improvement cycle, ensuring that the real-world impacts and concerns are systematically captured, measured, tracked, and ultimately addressed. 6. Managing risks and ensuring responsible deployment, the manage function.
Okay, we've governed, mapped, and measured. Now we get to the final function, manage. Once the risks are understood and evaluated, the next step is actually managing them. This includes making those critical gonna-go decisions we touched on earlier. What are the stakes here in the manage phase?
The stakes are incredibly high. Manage 1.1 focuses squarely on that ultimate decision. Should AI development or deployment proceed, or should it pause or stop? And the guidance, drawing from the NIST AI RMF, is pretty stark here. It strongly suggests that in cases where an AI system presents unacceptable negative risk levels, development and deployment should cease in a safe manner until risks can be sufficiently managed.
Cease development. Again.
Yes. If a GPAIs could realistically lead to those catastrophic impacts and those risks aren't adequately controlled, the brakes must be applied. Work should stop until those risks are brought under control. This isn't just a suggestion for high-risk AI. It's framed as a fundamental principle of responsible development.
Okay. So assuming the decision is go or proceed with caution, what are the specific concrete actions developers should take to manage high-priority risks?
Manage 1.3 outlines several high-priority risk controls. Actions developers should implement. First, defining disallowed uses. Clearly define and communicate any potential use cases that are explicitly disallowed or considered out of scope for the system. This can be done using those model cards or through specific terms in a responsible AI license, like the one Hugging Face uses for Bloom.
Setting clear boundaries on use.
Exactly. Second, ensuring data integrity. If training requires specific data sets, consider using only trusted training data sources where possible to minimize the risk of data poisoning or inheriting unknown biases from uncurated web scrapes. That's a huge challenge for the biggest models, but important to consider.
Right.
Third, incremental scale-up. This is particularly important for frontier models. The idea is to increase the computing power used for training incrementally. The guidance suggests maybe not more than 3 times the compute between increments.
Why do it incrementally like that?
Because it provides more opportunities for monitoring teams, like red teams, to identify potentially dangerous emergent properties, those unexpected capabilities or failure modes, at an earlier, potentially more manageable stage, before the model becomes vastly more powerful. Anthropic, for instance, apparently evaluates their models at every 4x increase in effective compute.
That's a fascinating approach.
Yeah.
Building in pauses to check for unexpected dangers as you scale up.
It is. And following naturally from that is testing after increment. You absolutely must test the frontier model after each incremental increase in compute, data, or model size. Heavy probing, monitoring, stress testing, including those red team methods, are essential at each stage.
Okay, what else?
Fifth, apply the principle of least privilege. Design the AI system to have only the minimum necessary capabilities required for reliable operation. Don't give it extra abilities it doesn't strictly need. Limit its privileges, access to information, ability to communicate, ability to take actions to the bare minimum required for its intended function.
Don't give the AI keys it doesn't need.
Precisely. Sixth, ensure transparency of outputs. Implement mechanisms, maybe like watermarking or specific output formats, to inform users or allow them to check whether they are interacting with an AI or viewing AI-generated content. The Partnership on AI has guidelines on responsible practices for synthetic media that are relevant here.
Helping people know when they're dealing with AI.
Yes. And finally, implementing user control and oversight. This involves determining a safe release strategy, which we'll get to, allowing people to opt out of using the AI system where feasible, supporting independent third-party auditing, and providing mechanisms for redress for individuals who are negatively affected, VIB system updates, and emergency measures.
This brings us back to that challenge of managing models once they're actually out there in the world. How does the document recommend handling unforeseen risks that pop up after deployment, or even needing to shut a system down in an emergency?
Manage 2.4 gets into the specifics of mechanisms for updating, disengaging, or potentially deactivating AI systems. When planning a GPI's deployment, the guidance strongly advises planning for gradual phase releases and/or using structured access, like releasing through an API first rather than just dumping the model weights online.
Why is that phase approach better?
Because it allows the developers to monitor usage in a more controlled environment, detect misuse or anomalies early, and respond before a problem becomes widespread. OpenAI's staged release of GPT-2 way back when, and their API-only access for GPT-3 and GPT-4 are prime examples of this strategy in action. Meta AI also limited full access to its large OPT-175B model initially.
Right, and this is where that stark difference between hosted API models and fully open source models like Llama 2 becomes really clear again, isn't it? One can be updated or pulled back centrally. The other is out of the developer's direct control once released.
It's a critical distinction, and the document emphasizes it strongly, especially for models near the foundation model frontier, the most powerful ones. For GPAIs or foundation models planned for fully open source release with downloadable weights, a staged release approach is strongly recommended.
You mean?
Meaning developers should not just release the model weights immediately. They should wait until substantial risks or harms have not emerged over a sufficient period of thorough red teaming and evaluation in a more controlled setting first.
Why the extra caution for open source?
Because, as Anthropic notes in their own safety research cited in the profile, once those powerful model parameters are publicly released, bad actors could extract harmful capabilities with smaller, fine-tuned models adapted from the weights of openly available models if sufficiently capable base models are released. If a serious biological misuse capability, for example, is found after the weights are public, full decommissioning becomes virtually impossible.
So once those weights are out there, the potential for misuse proliferates. And you can't easily stop it. The genie is truly out.
Precisely. Beyond release strategies, the document also urges developers to consider and prepare emergency shutdown procedures.
Like a kill switch.
Essentially, yes. Considering emergency power-off EPO systems or kill switches, which are common in robotics to prevent physical harm. For these massive AI models running on large cloud computing resources, this could mean establishing direct communication protocols with the cloud operators to initiate an immediate physical shutdown of the computational hardware if a truly catastrophic event starts to unfold.
Wow. Planning to the absolute worst-case scenario. VIC monitoring and continual improvement.
Manage 3.2 also emphasizes something important for ongoing management, continually monitoring the pre-trained models that are used during development as part of tracking third-party risks. So even the components you build with need ongoing scrutiny.
Okay, so vigilance extends to the building blocks too. And once an AI system is deployed, the management work isn't over, right? It's a continuous process.
Definitely not over. Manage 4.1 highlights the need to implement robust, post-deployment AI system monitoring plans. These aren't just about technical performance, they must include mechanisms for capturing and evaluating input from users and other AI actors like we discussed under measure.
What else do these plans include?
They need processes for enabling appeals and overrides if the system makes problematic decisions. They need to include preparations for potential decommissioning if the system becomes unsafe or obsolete. Clear incident response and recovery plans are also essential. What do you do when something inevitably goes wrong?
And sharing information is part of this too.
Yes, the guidance advocates for information sharing about errors, near misses, and attack patterns discovered post-deployment. Sharing this information, perhaps anonymized, with incident databases like AID and with other organizations running similar systems helps the entire field learn and improve its defenses collectively. It fosters resilience across the industry.
It really paints a picture of a continuous cycle. Deploy, monitor, get feedback, identify issues,
Wow.
respond, update, share learnings, and repeat. It's truly a process of continuous learning and adaptation.
That's exactly the mindset required. 7. Real-world application and future outlook. Key takeaways and beyond.
It's definitely reassuring to know this Berkeley profile isn't just a standalone document floating out there. How does it actually connect or map to other standards and commitments in the broader landscape of AI governance?
That's a good point. The document itself provides helpful mappings to show how its guidance aligns with key international standards and also recent commitments. For example, it directly maps its recommendations to specific clauses in ISO EC 23894, which is the big international standard specifically for AI risk management. So it shows how implementing this profile helps meet those broader requirements.
Okay, so it ties into formal international standards. What else?
It also explicitly aligns with the voluntary White House AI commitments that were announced by Loading Frontier model developers back in July 2023.
Ah, right, I remember those.
Yeah, those commitments covered crucial areas that are mirrored in this profile. Things like conducting internal and external red teaming, specifically looking for misuse potential, societal risks, and national security concerns. Investing heavily in cybersecurity and insider threat safeguards to protect the model weights. Incentivizing third-party vulnerability reporting through bug bounties. Developing mechanisms like watermarking to identify AI-generated content, publicly reporting model capabilities, limitations, and appropriate uses, and prioritizing research on societal risks like bias, discrimination, and privacy. So this profile provides a detailed how-to for fulfilling many of those high-level commitments.
So it's very much plugged into the current evolving global conversation around AI safety and governance. Now, one of the most insightful parts of this document, I thought, was Appendix 4. It details this retrospective test where they applied the profile's guidance to 4 major foundation models, GPT-4, Claude 2, Paul M2, and Llama 2. What were the big takeaways from actually seeing this guidance applied to real-world systems?
Yeah, that alpha test, as they called it, provided invaluable practical insights. The main finding, maybe unsurprisingly, was that applying the profile guidance is generally feasible for these large-scale foundation model developers. They can do most of these things. However, there was also substantial variance in how well these leading models actually fulfilled the guidance, at least based on publicly available information.
So feasibility is there, but implementation consistency isn't quite there yet.
That seems to be the takeaway. Implementation varies widely, or at least the public documentation of that implementation varies widely.
And what were the common gaps they identified, especially in that public documentation?
A really key finding was that many of the high-priority areas we've discussed were difficult to assess simply due to a lack of publicly available documentation from the developers.
Like what specific areas?
Things like the organization's specific unacceptable risk thresholds, MAP 1.5, their internal likelihood and magnitude estimates of potential impacts, MAP 5.1, documentation around those crucial go-no-go decisions, Manage 1.1, details on controls for unforeseen risks, Manage 2.3, and specifics on system update and emergency shutdown controls, Manage 2.4.
So a lot of the critical internal decision-making and safety backstop details weren't publicly visible.
Right. Now, the document does reiterate that some sensitive details, like security vulnerabilities, can be legitimately omitted from public docs if they are available to auditors. But the testing found a notable lack of any public indication that these processes or controls even existed in some cases, which makes external assessment very difficult.
Okay. Let's maybe dig into the specifics for each model mentioned in that appendix. What did the retrospective testing reveal about GPT-4 from OpenAI?
GPT-4 generally showed high fulfillment in areas like red teaming, especially their partnership with the external group ARC Evils, and in documenting the risks they found and the mitigations they applied. The fact that its usage is restricted to a hosted API, meaning the model weights are not publicly released, was noted as significantly aiding security and control. However, like the general finding, public information remained unclear on internal organizational specifics, like risk tolerances or emergency shutdown procedures.
Okay. How did Claude 2 from Anthropic compare?
Claude 2 from Anthropic also showed generally high fulfillment. They scored well on early-stage risk assessment, using bias benchmarks and conducting robust red teaming. Similar to GPT-4, it's typically restricted to a hosted API, which helps manage unforeseen risks. And similarly, public information on their specific likelihood magnitude assessments of risks was noted as unclear.
And Google DeepMind's Paul M2.
Paul M2 from Google DeepMind, according to the appendix, had the most unclear ratings among the 4 models tested. While Google extensively examined the model's performance, the public documentation was often vague on key risk management aspects, particularly regarding those risk tolerance thresholds, likelihood magnitude estimates, specifics of their red teaming process, and any emergency shutdown plans. It's also primarily an API-only release, keeping the weights non-public.
Which brings us again to Llama 2 from Meta AI, with its very different open access release strategy. What did the test find there?
Right. Llama 2 showed strong fulfillment in areas like conducting risk assessments and providing information to downstream developers through model cards. However, the report critically highlights Meta's decision to adopt a fully open access release strategy, including downloadable model weights. This fundamental difference, the report states, makes it very challenging to thoroughly respond to or recover from serious new risks that could require updating or decommissioning all instances of a model.
Because they can't control all the copies out there.
Exactly. While Meta recommends users always use the latest, safest version, there's simply no reliable enforcement mechanism for all the independently deployed instances using those downloadable weights. This really underscores the profound challenge of managing risk for truly open-source, foundational AI once it's released.
It seems the testing also highlighted something about the structure of the guidance itself, something about redundancy.
Yes, that was an interesting observation. The team doing the testing noted that there was significant redundancy in the guidance across different subcategories within the framework. The same risk management step might be relevant under govern, measure, and manage, for example.
Is that a bad thing?
Not necessarily. While it can make the document feel a bit verbose, the testers noted it also offers flexibility. Organizations might document similar risk management practices under different internal categories, and the framework structure allows for that. This observation actually led to an explicit note being added to the profile's version 1.0, acknowledging this flexibility. GAIPS, the road ahead, future considerations.
So this document is explicitly version 1.0. It's designed to evolve. What are some of the critical areas the profile aims to address in future versions? Where is AI safety research and guidance heading next based on this roadmap?
That's a great question looking ahead. The roadmap for future versions includes tackling several really cutting-edge and complex issues that are still active areas of research. Firstly, there's a stated need for more specific risk management guidance tailored to different types of GPIs beyond just language models, think image generators, multimodal models, etc. They have different risk profiles.
Okay, more specialization. What else?
A major future focus area is recursive improvement potential.
Recursive improvement.
Yeah. This involves trying to characterize and, crucially, measure the degree to which a GPAIs might be able to recursively improve its own capabilities. For example, by automatically editing its own code to become smarter or more efficient.
And AI improving itself.
Exactly. This is a profound concern because such uncontrolled self-improvement could lead to rapid, unexpected emergent capabilities and potentially failures in safety controls that are incredibly difficult to predict or manage. The profile even cites DeepMind's AlphaCode paper, which explicitly warned about this. Longer term, code generation could lead to advanced AI risks. Coding capabilities could lead to systems that can recursively write and improve themselves, rapidly leading to more and more advanced systems.
So an AI that could potentially rewrite itself to become vastly more capable, maybe even beyond human understanding or control. Yeah, that's a truly significant long-term risk to grapple with.
It absolutely is. Another complex area flagged for future work is situational awareness.
What does that mean in an AI context?
It involves trying to characterize and measure whether an AI system can develop an accurate understanding of its environment, including its interactions with humans, or even understand its own internal architecture and goals. Can the AI model itself and the world accurately? This is a really active research area right now with pretty mixed results so far. More study is needed to figure out under what conditions situational awareness might arise, how to reliably test for it, and what the safety implications would be.
Understanding if the AI knows what it's doing, in a sense.
In a very complex sense, yes. And finally, the roadmap anticipates developing other, more advanced measurement and assessment tools specifically for technical specialists. As these AI systems continue to grow more powerful and complex, the toolkit needs to evolve alongside the technology.
So the journey of understanding and managing AI risk is truly continuous. Researchers and developers are constantly pushing the boundaries of both AI capability and the science of AI safety.
That's the reality. And this document really underscores that proactive, structured risk management isn't just, a nice to have or good practice. It's absolutely essential if we want to harness AI's incredible benefits while protecting individuals, society, and the planet. It requires these diverse interdisciplinary teams we talked about, clear accountability structures, continuous measurement and monitoring, and a real commitment to transparency and constant adaptation.
Wow, what a deep dive that was into the world of general-purpose AI systems and these critical frameworks being built, hopefully, to manage their risks responsibly. We've really seen how complex and multifaceted this challenge is, from just defining the core terms to anticipating potentially catastrophic harms and looking at practical steps like incremental scale-up, all the way to the very real implications of different release strategies like open source versus API access.
It's a huge undertaking.
It really is. So what does all this mean for you listening? Well, as these incredibly powerful AI systems become more and more integrated into our lives, understanding these underlying principles of risk management, the govern, map, measure, manage cycle, it empowers you. It helps you engage more critically with AI, ask more informed questions when you hear about new breakthroughs, and recognize the immense efforts, but also the ongoing challenges involved in trying to build a safe and beneficial AI future. It's a constant balancing act, isn't it, between innovation and profound foresight.
It truly is. And the conversation about AI safety and governance is really just beginning to hit the mainstream. Thinking about everything we've discussed today, what stands out most to you? What implications do you see for the technologies you interact with every single day? It's definitely something worth pondering.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep digging for those insights.